Welcome to episode 82 on the Air Hug Community Podcast. Welcome back to the Air Hug Community. We are getting ready with a new episode, but just a quick intro here if it's your first time. My name is Judy Arizosa, and I'm basically the midlife mom next door. But really, I'm just a mom and a wife and a grandma, and this podcast was created because I wanted to share stories and experiences from myself and others who are in this midlife, messy middle part of life. It's wonderful, it's awful, it's challenging, it's rewarding, it's everything. And there are so many stories and experiences that we can share. And that's what this podcast is all about. Hello, everybody, and welcome back today. We have a very special guest, and her name is Becca Ribbing. But you go by Becca, correctly?
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. Becca is a coach and actually helps people understand that in a nutshell, life is short. Do what you love ASAP. I love that. I saw that on your website and I'm like, well, that gets right to the point. So Becca, there's so many things I could ask you today. I love the life is short, figure it out and do what you want, because we just don't have time to waste. And I know a lot of the people in this audience and you and myself, even though we are quite a few years apart in age, are still midlife. So I always like to say midlife starts whenever you think it starts and it ends when you die, because we don't really know. But anyway, my question for you is, which is something that we touched on a little bit, about getting honest with yourself about why things work for you and why don't they work for you.
Yeah, I just am like such a believer that women especially are kind of trained to not put themselves first. We have so many responsibilities in our lives. We have so much going on that it becomes easy to just go one day to the next without really doing a deep dive into whether we are enjoying where we are, whether where we are works for us. And so I think that it's a really powerful reminder to people that wherever you are, however busy you think you are right now, you are losing time if you don't do the work right now to figure out what you want out of life, where you want to go. And I think that there are periods of time where it's hard to do that. I mean, if you're a young mom, that's a really hard time to tell someone you should figure out what your life purpose is. But,
well, you've kind of already made a choice at that point, right?
Well, and you've already made a choice at that point. But I think that then, we have the kids and we just keep kind of going from one thing to the next without really slowing down and thinking about where we are going and making sure we're on the path that we love. Because I think that also a lot of times when we talk about life purpose, I find that people start talking about it like people used to talk about jobs in the 1950s. Like, you get a life purpose, and then that's your life purpose for the next 20, 30, however many years left you have in the workforce. And it's not actually how it really works. Our life purpose is constantly growing and changing. Anyone who's listening to this podcast is interested in personal development, is interested in growth, is interested in, being stronger within yourself. And people like that don't like staying static. So to me, life purpose is this continuum. Like, you may have had one purpose at one point in your life, but now maybe it's time to shift. Maybe it's time to really recognize what would bring you more fulfillment, what would bring more joy and happiness into your life.
Yeah. I think it's really relevant to anyone who's out there who may be an empty nester, or maybe whose kids have become, maybe they're still in a nest, but they're like super independent, because there's been a big shift of like, okay, they don't really need us anymore. They might need a little financial assistance, and they might need a little bit of maybe just, we all need human interaction and maybe a little advice now and then. but they don't need us like they did when they were preschoolers, like where if
Exactly.
we were out of their sight, then it was like panic city. And it's very interesting, I think, for a lot of women in particular, but I don't know if men go through this or not. I'm not a man. I can't really speak to that. But if we've dedicated, 25 years to raising a brood of kids and then decide, now what is our path? And I think a lot of people get to that point, and we have to take a hard look on what we want our path to be. So what would you say to someone in that position who feels maybe lost or not important?
I think the first thing I always start with is self-love and self-compassion, because it is a life change, and I'm just starting to enter that life change. I have a 13-year-old son who is extraordinarily independent. So I really don't have that much parenting to do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, fights with friends every once in a while, but on the whole, he's really on autopilot, knock on all sorts of wood, because you never know.
Mhm.
But it's it's hard, because once you hit these changes, sometimes we get depressed. Sometimes, we hold on to where we were, and it's hard to even necessarily recognize, I need a change for me. I need to do something different for me, because we're so used to focusing on other people that don't always actually even recognize the thoughts going on in our own head. And I think that when people are in that spot,
Mhm.
it's so easy also to just distract yourself, right? Like, we have the phone, we can pick up the phone at any moment. And if we're having uncomfortable feelings, just scroll on Facebook or scroll on Instagram or read a bunch of articles. And I remember very vividly in like drug prevention high school health class, the health teacher talking about, if you want to quit smoking, one of the things you need to do is have something in your hands, like with a pencil or a toothpick, because it keeps you from actually picking up a cigarette. That, I don't know why that made such an impact on me, because I've never smoked. I didn't smoke at the time, but just the tangible physical aspect of it. Well, I think cell phones have become our cigarettes. Like, we
Oh my
can
God,
literally have
yes, right?
we can have something in our hand all the time distracting us. We don't have to sit in line at a grocery store and just be with ourselves. We don't have to sit at a restaurant if we're alone waiting for our food and be with ourselves. We literally can be distracted 100% of the time. But when you're distracted 100% of the time, you're not really acknowledging the uncomfortable feelings. And sure, you may do yoga, you may do meditation. I love both of those things. However, the point of those is actually to like let go of your thoughts. And so if you're letting go of your thoughts on one hand, and you're ignoring your thoughts with the cell phone or the tablet in the other, then you're actually not spending time really sitting here and now and figuring out what you want for your life.
Yeah. And especially, don't you think if you're like constantly scrolling on social media, that you're more apt to be like feeling like you don't measure up? Because we all know that social media is a highlight reel. And look at that one. She's so successful in her business. And look at that one. And you might, for someone who's a new or soon to be empty nester, it can be kind of like, well, what do you want to do? Right?
Right.
How do we
Well,
want
and
to pay it forward?
actually, one of the things I've really loved about Wordle is the people that post when they didn't get it. Like, people that post when, are you familiar with Wordle?
No.
Oh, okay. So it's been kind of a thing, and it's all over my feed on Facebook right now. Where Wordle is this, like, it's almost like a self-play Scrabble. You're there's a word, and you're trying to guess the word, and you have 6 chances to guess it. And there's like green blocks and yellow blocks. It tells you where the letters are. But the thing I love about it is people keep posting how they did for the day. And some people post that some people only post on the days that they did really well, but a lot of people post when they didn't get it at all. And to me, that's like such a heartening thing, because social media is usually this like annoying echo chamber of like fake happiness where it's like, I don't
Yeah.
know what's really going on. I think one of the things that I find on social media is people, I've had this experience so many times at this point. People will start posting over and over again how wonderful their husband is, how much they appreciate him, how he's the best husband in the world. And then 6 months later, they're getting divorced.
Yeah,
I
that's
think that
heartbreaking. Yeah.
it's heartbreaking, but I think it's like, I think at a certain level, sometimes what we post on social media is like how we want the world to see us,
We're trying to convince ourselves. Yeah.
trying to convince ourselves. And I think that
Yeah.
as a coach, I see that really deeply because I kind of know what's going on in so many people's lives. I see what they post, and then I see what the real authentic self is, and the fears that they're having and the struggles they're having. And I just wish everyone could see that depth, because I think
Mhm.
that it makes us feel very lonely.
So I think that circles back very well to being honest with yourself, is what's working and what isn't. So in the case of the person posting about, unless they really had no clue, but I find that hard to believe, if they're getting divorced 6 months later, you got to kind of wonder, are they being honest with themselves?
I think they're trying to convince themselves. And I think
Yeah.
that we spend a lot of time trying to convince ourselves that what we think we should do, or more importantly, what the world thinks we should do, is what we should do. And I don't know, because I run into this a lot. My job is to help people kind of filter through and figure out what they want to do next and
Mhm.
where their path is going. And it's really funny because when I'm starting to work with someone, they'll tell me all the shoulds. They'll tell me like what path they've been on, where they're going, and they'll sound very sure. And I'm usually like, okay, but you're hiring me for a reason. So there's got to be something deeper. And as soon as we kind of get past that surface level, there's been something in the back of their brain that's been nagging them that they really want to do, but they're not getting any support for it. And because they're not getting the support they need, and they don't feel secure enough, they don't feel strong enough to do it, what they're really looking for is validation, and that they aren't crazy for wanting to do this. And I think that a lot of women, when they're entering that empty nest period, just hit that, where they know there's something back there that they really want to be doing, and they've been giving and giving and giving to all of these people, but people aren't giving back to them, and people are not being the cheerleader they need to feel strong enough to move forward.
So what do you say to them in that case? If they, I mean, do they have to become their own cheerleader?
You do have to become your own cheerleader,
Yeah.
certainly. But I think you also need to recognize that you deserve cheerleaders too. And so
Oh, good point.
if you don't have that cheerleader, then it's actually important to be really thoughtful about how to get them. And I think that we often, at all stages of our lives, ignore this, because I will be talking to someone who's in their 20s, and they'll be like, I wish I had a mentor. I just wish I had a mentor. I'm like, well, what are you doing to get a mentor? Oh, I thought a
Yeah.
mentor was supposed to ask me to be like, what do you mean? What am I doing? I'm just supposed to like land a mentor. I'm like, well, you know what? The people that actively are seeking out people to mentor, those people are usually really bossy. You don't want those as your mentors anyway. And it's the same thing at every stage of your life. Like, sure, we all have the bossy friend. What you need to do is develop the friendships that are really going to help you brush off like any hurts, help you recognize that you have value and that you're awesome, but also very gently say, hey, but you keep telling me you want to do this. I don't hear you doing it. Like what
Let's see
maybe
some
is your next
action.
step? Exactly. And so I would just really, if anyone is on this call listening to this, like think about, maybe if you don't have that in your life, think about acquaintances that maybe you should be getting closer to that have that energy, or maybe think about hiring a coach. There are a lot of different avenues, both paid and unpaid, but it requires believing that you deserve it.
Believing that you deserve it. That's huge. And it gets down to worthiness and self-love. And I know we talked about this before you got on, and you referred to our podcast with Lorraine Santos, which I think was maybe episode 56. It was in the 50s somewhere. And of course, Lorraine went through, folks, you got to listen to that episode if you haven't already. Lorraine went through a great big life change as what I would call a young woman in her 40s with a very serious breast cancer. And what she learned most from this was that she had to love herself no matter what her body was doing. And once she became receptive to that, she also became very receptive to her treatment. But it really did start a lot with her self-love. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, Becca, because I think, let me give you a little story, because I would love for you to comment on this. I was working with a client and we talked about some mini habits that we could just work on for the next week, just to kind of get things going. And one of the things we talked about was non-exercise movement. So I didn't want to call it cardio or a workout. I said, but can you make sure that each day you have 10 minutes of just 10 uninterrupted minutes of moving? I don't care if you're going outside to maybe listen to a podcast or just to be alone with your thoughts or walking your dog where you're constantly moving for 10 minutes. Yeah, that's easy. I said, great. All right, I got one more mini habit for you. And I said, can you every day, at least once, tell yourself that you love yourself? And the comment was, it'd be easier to do the 10 minutes of walking, which I totally get. But I think both are super important.
Both are critical because honestly, as well as anyone, like if you don't have that self-love, what is the working out for? If you don't have that self-love, you're really stuck. And I think that as our lives change, it's sometimes hard to hold on to that. It's
Yeah.
I was reading this really interesting book. I don't even know that I'd recommend it. It was Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel. And it's all about sex and our sex lives and stuff. And one of the things that she mentioned is that sex lives tend to, small children tend to hurt sex lives. And that makes sense to anyone listening, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But one of the things that she said, why though, I had never thought about. She was like, when you have little kids, you're cuddling with them, you're like hugging them, you've got a lot of physical, like that physical endorphin rush of just having affection.
Mhm.
And I think that also when you have little kids, you have that endorphin rush of like, I love you. And like all the like cute little things kids do to show you they love you because they're being very wholehearted. But as we move into having older like teenagers can be really tough. And then you had this cute kid, you have this teenager who may or may not like you, and then you're an empty nester. And I think that it's a really hard path because you started from this like almost oversaturation. And I would imagine I'm still in the middle, but I would imagine that's a very hard thing to let go of, because even if you still are married, even if you have a partner, they're not going to ever be able to fill up that hole that the little kid had.
I think that's a very interesting perspective. And I think I was very lucky with the parents that I had because, first of all, I'm the youngest of 8 kids. So my mom had a lot of affection, right? And she was needed in very many ways. But one of the things, this was her parenting style that she taught all of us from the very beginning was, you are very loved, but you need to know that the number one person in my life is your father, my husband, and I think a lot of moms maybe forget that. And she taught me that. I don't think I was 13 years old the first time I heard that, maybe younger, but she always let us know that we were loved unconditionally, but the number one love of her life was her husband, and that we would understand that when we found our mate. And I have always parented that way. And I
Mhm.
think it was a great preparation for becoming an empty nester because my husband is still number one. And I think my kids always know that. And I even tell my kids, you're very bit. I have grandchildren and a couple of kids who are parents. And I'm like, you are very busy. You need, and I'll help you. You need to go out on a date with your husband regularly, and you need
Right.
to keep nurturing that relationship regularly. I mean, weekly if possible. I don't care if you're going for a walk. It doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to put on good clothes unless you want to, but
That's
to
beautiful.
speaking to that, yeah. And I thank my mother for that, who had zero formal education in psychology, but I think she could have taught courses.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's really, I mean, I think that's a really good reminder too, because your kids can't be your life. And I mean, most people here are probably already past most of that. But I also run into a lot of, a lot of my mom's friends because my mom's in her 60s. A lot of my mom's friends are obsessed with getting grandchildren. And I would imagine that one of the reasons why they are obsessed with getting grandchildren, I mean, grandchildren are great. I can't wait. I can't wait to have grandchildren. but like filling that hole back up, the feeling that like little kid cute loves me and I'm not gonna have to deal with a teenager. This is awesome.
It's funny because I definitely had those yearnings. And even like if my husband and I would be out to dinner or traveling and we see a family with little kids, like people probably think we're creepy, but we're always like, oh, what a great family you have. That's so cute. We remember when we had 4 kids in tow. And I always say to them, the days are long, but the years are short, and it just makes me laugh.
Yeah. I'm gonna tell a little story, totally a sidetrack, but it was so sweet. It was my one of my first airplane trips with my son once he started walking, my older son. And my older son was like quite a love. They're both loves, but he was very friendly, very loving. And this he kept reaching over across the aisle to this woman on the other side of the aisle. And finally she was like, "Can I just hold him?" And I was like, "Sure, lady." Like, I can't keep him. And they cuddled the entire flight. It was so funny. And she told me that she was on her way home because her son had had a stroke, but she didn't tell me that until nearly the end of the airplane flight. And it
Oh,
was just so sweet. And like, I mean, guess my son picked up on it. I don't know, but
some kind of special communication that
I
is
know.
between them. That's
Yeah.
endearing. That's sweet.
Yeah. So,
So, if someone is trying to find their path, it does go back to honesty, doesn't it?
yeah, it really does. And giving yourself the space to be honest, because I think that at all times in our life, a lot of times when we are unhappy, it comes out sideways with the people we love, or it comes out sideways if we're still in a job, like with our boss, when we're not actually setting ourselves up for success. We're not being honest with ourselves with what we need. So we can't really even articulate what we need
Yeah.
and make the changes that we need to make.
Yeah. There was something you said. I can't remember if we said this on the air or in our little chat before, because now it's all blending together. But you talked about when one area of your life, I think this was before, right?
Mhm.
It's really gone awry. And I just thought about something about like maybe someone who stayed married because of their kids. And then they become an empty nester. And then they are getting honest and they realize they have to get out of the relationship. I mean, I know you're not a marriage therapist and neither am I, but I feel like that's, part of the process. For some
It
people, it
is.
comes
And
up.
I may not be a marriage therapist, but I'm a career coach. And so I actually get a lot of people in that stage because all
Mm.
of a sudden they were pretty happy with, having the part-time job that paid peanuts. And all of a sudden they have to get really real about how they're going to support themselves until retirement. And honestly, a lot of people don't have retirement savings. So are they even going to retire? So I think that it's really important to put ourselves first as soon as we can, as soon as the kids And as soon as you're out of that, like just keeping the oxygen mask stage of little babies, like the more you can be honest with yourself as you're going forward at whatever stage of your life, the better you set yourself up for going forward.
Wow, I really like that. Do you have any pieces of advice for people who may be like breaking into the workforce after not, or maybe needing to change careers?
I think one of my biggest piece of advice is really got to do it. I think that I run into women that are in their late 40s, 50s, or 60s who almost feel like it's too late and they don't have the self-compassion. And so they're really struggling with it. And it's not too late. And quite frankly, you don't actually even have the um it's not kind to yourself to write yourself off that young. I mean, it'd be one thing
Yeah.
if I was talking to someone who is 90 and like maybe I can't change jobs. But I run into this pretty much anytime someone is older than like 40, and be like, oh, it's too late for that. I can't do that. I can't do that. And really pigeonholing themselves. And it's like, well, if you're 48, if you're 55, well, even if you're 55, like at a minimum, you've got 10 more years of work. Like maybe you're not going to go back to get your PhD, although I do know people who go back to get their PhD at that age.
Yeah.
But it's really so sad, I think. And I think women, well, actually, men, I now I think about it, men do this too. And it's like as soon as you hit 50 and above, they're like, oh, it's too late. And it's like, it is not. I was talking to a man who was he's another podcaster. And when I was saying this, he laughed because he totally changed his career path in his early 50s and went back to school and was doing amazing things because he was following his passion. And that is so energizing and it brings you forward into middle and later age stages so much more energized and happy. And you owe that to yourself. You owe it to yourself to have whatever time remaining you have be as fulfilling and heart filling as possible.
Okay, I have to speak to that because I'm that person. I started my business in my 50th year. So I was still 49 when I started Kick It Up Personal Training, which later became Grateful Fitness. But by the end of the year, I was 50. And there were a lot of people who said to me, you're not going to be in business for 2 or 3 years. And I was like, maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I know that I'm helping people. And as long as I continue to help people, I will continue to do this.
And that I kind of feel like is the mic drop, but also you need to surround yourself. Everyone needs to surround themselves with cheerleaders because that's so hard to move past. It's hard not to let those naysayers get into your head.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do appreciate the people who were my cheerleaders and supported me. And by nature, I'm a cheerleader. I mean, the nature of my business is to be a cheerleader. You're doing great. You can do, so how interesting is that? I don't know. I'm so fascinated by the fact that you built this around honesty, which to me is because I think women lie to themselves in order to maybe not deal with feelings or to maybe, cover up their lack of confidence.
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think sometimes because the thing that in your heart is the right thing to do is scary. Um, it's scary to get another job sometimes. It's
Yeah.
scary to leave a husband if it's not working. I mean,
Yeah. It's
there are a
scary to take
lot
a
of
pay cut, right?
I mean, a lot of it is scary. And at a certain level, the distractions are comforting, binge watching an entire season on Netflix in the moment feels better
Mhm.
than picking up the clarity journal and figuring out what you're going to do or picking up another book and going to the gym. But ultimately, if you're going to have self-care for yourself, that is the deep self-care,
Yeah.
figuring out what you want.
So you brought up the clarity journal. Tell us about the clarity journal.
Oh, I forgot that I didn't even mention it before. So I wrote the clarity journal. I actually wrote it when I was in my own time of trying to figure out what the next step of my path was, because I think that a lot of times when we talk about clarity, we think that the clarity we have today is going to be last us until we retire. And if we think that way, that's holding ourselves back because we're constantly growing and changing. And the funny thing is, the warning sign when you're not being clear and when you don't have the clarity you need is that you start being like, I don't know what I want to do. I'm not really sure. That, yes, that happens, but a lot of times you also just start snapping at your husband, or you're getting agitated and you're not necessarily sure why. Anyway, I was in that point and I was talking to a friend, because that's what we do, we complain to our friends.
Thank God
And
for
she was,
friends.
thank God for friends, and she was great. She finally was like, Becca, you're a coach, how would you help yourself through this? And oh, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I stopped, got off the phone with her, and I wrote down every question I could think of that helps my clients move forward, helps my clients have those aha moments about what they want. And as I was writing them down, I then went back and started answering them for myself. And I just realized how powerful it was to be pulled out of my own head and look at these questions in a totally different way. Look at the question about what I want for myself in a totally different way. And to recognize that it's okay. You hit these cycles and it just means that you need a new challenge.
Beautiful. And so where can people, is the clarity journal kind of like prompts?
It's a lot of prompts, some quotes to help you kind of go deeper into the prompts. My very favorite prompt in the whole journal is, who do you envy and what does that tell you about yourself? And
Oh,
I love that one, because when we ask that of ourselves, we don't say envy. We ask, who do we admire? Who do we like? Who inspires us? It's always that sort of thing. And the answer, usually, if you ask, who inspires you, it'd be like Oprah, or someone else like the Dalai Lama, people that we're not necessarily wanting to emulate. But when we ask, who do you envy? That's sticky. Like, that is, if you wanted to be a podcaster, you wouldn't envy every podcaster. You envy podcasters that have a very specific voice, or ask questions really well, or have great people who come on their podcast. Whatever it is, you envy specific things. Like, if you're a health podcaster, you probably don't envy someone who is a like mommy blogger. You envy specific things. And this
mhm.
is like true in all of our lives. But the cool thing is as soon as you start really opening yourself up to that, you start noticing more how that's telling you what you really want in your life,
Mhm.
how and it's giving you a framework. And especially if you can find multiple people in this category of
Mhm.
having something you envy about them, then you can start to make that authentically your own.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. It's interesting. Envy is such a strong word, and so it brings up some connotations in my head. And as you were talking, I was thinking about envy in a way that, is that positive or is that negative? And then I said to myself, which I say to myself often, is things are not always A or B, black or white.
Right.
Envy,
Well,
so envy cannot be just good or bad.
right. And I don't think envy in and of itself is bad. I think what we do with our envy is bad. So I think that
Mm,
our envy, all of our negative emotions are really just trying to tell us something. So envy is just trying to tell us what we want. We're having a visceral body reaction to, I want that. That's not negative. What would be negative is, I want that, and I hope they fail. Like, that's not a positive thing. I
got you.
mean,
Right.
sometimes envy can spiral if we're not feeling good within ourselves into negative places. But even like anger, I think a lot of times women are told that anger isn't good. It's like, well, anger is just telling you that a boundary's been broken, or anger is telling you that someone's taking advantage of you. Like, Anger
It's time to
is
take action.
it's time to take action. And now, if you just go around like yelling at surface people instead of taking the action you actually need to do, that's not good. Like, there's certainly lots of things you can do with that anger that aren't constructive or healthy. But noticing the anger is so helpful. If you can notice it without judging yourself, then you can be like, oh, that is what this trigger is. And I don't like it. I need this to change.
Yeah, that's really, really, really interesting. And that's funny because you're coming on the Shirt Tails, your episode, the episode just prior to this is, or maybe two episodes prior, is all about anger. And
Oh, I'm
you
gonna have to come
just,
back and listen.
yeah, the anger episode was episode number, come on, 22, or no,
Okay.
episode 80.
Okay.
And so I think this might be two episodes after this, but anyways, it's interesting because you were pretty much in alignment with what that counselor said as well.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So listen, where can people find you?
So you can find me at beccaribbing.com. That's BECCARIBBING. And I'm sure it'll be in the show notes.
Yes, it will.
And you can also find the Clarity Journal on Amazon.
Awesome. Well, listen, this has been really great. And I love the message of being honest with yourself. And I think this was a great direction to take the conversation in. So I want to thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Two of my favorite takeaways from this entire conversation are how critical it is to actually verbalize love for yourself on a daily basis, because our brains are very literal, and how honesty is so important in the path that we take. And so often when people are on these quests for getting fitter and healthier and this and that, and the biggest example I can think of is people who tell me, well, I eat healthy. And I'm thinking to myself, whatever, I guess so. First of all, healthy is such an undefined term, a relative term. It means something different to anyone. But then it's like, are you really eating healthy? Are you really being honest with yourself? And that goes all the way back to episode 2, when our guest was Jeannie Utter, and you can go back and look at that. I mean, Jeannie Utter lost 120 pounds and has kept it off for over 10 years at this point. And the turning point for her was to actually get on this journey and stay on it after, I don't even know how many failed attempts, decades worth. And she said for her, it was finally getting honest. And I think when people are at that crossroads, which happens a lot in midlife, where you're like, where do we go from here? We have to get honest with ourselves. And so I really want to thank Becca for having us take a hard look at that and bringing it all to light and how critical it is. And this is applicable in so many areas of our life. And one of the things we talk about is if you're unhappy in one area of your life, it's probably going to carry over to other areas. And yeah, it really will boil down to how much do you like yourself? So anyways, listen, thank you so much for tuning in. There was a lot to actually digest in this episode, but you know what? Whether you're starting a new journey as a new career, as a new empty nester, maybe it's just a Monday and you want to have a better week, whatever the fact may be, taking a moment to get honest with yourself and getting clear about what it is that's really important to you and what it is you really are doing is going to go a long way for you. So thank you again for tuning in. You've been listening to the Air Hug Community Podcast. This was episode 82, and God willing, we will be back again here next Tuesday on the Air Hug Community. Thank you for tuning in.